As we settle down, few disclaimers from the prior session. We were kind of wondering post-launch session, how do we introduce ourselves? So I'd like you to meet Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar, Kartikeya. No session is complete without Ganesha. I also heard a question about millennials. So we wanted to talk about the representation of the panel. We have a lot of senior members of the industry and one millennial who will moderate the session. All right, so it's a very interesting topic, and we're going to try and keep it as conversational as we can. I think basically for us, said a lot of things, and it all boils down to the question of why am I and who am I? मैं क्यों हूँ, मैं कौन हूँ? From an organizational context. So clearly, I think there's a lot of ways in which this topic can go around. I think Pari's keynote sort of covered the context from just from a nation, an identity as who we are as a nation, to an organization. And this question can also apply to us as an individual. So we're going to leave the biological context of the discussion out for a minute, for the next 40 minutes. But we're going to focus on the organization as to, are we able to answer the question of why we are and who we are? So just to kick off the proceedings, what I thought is we'll just go around the table once, and I'm going to just ask the question, Sam, why are you and who are you?
Without trying to crack a joke on why am I here, clearly, as an organization, who you are is sort of dependent on the purpose, right? And so we are pretty adaptable as people. And so depending upon that purpose, you tend to adapt. That purpose itself evolves. So the different GICs are in different sort of life cycle stages within their evolution. And depending upon where you are, your purpose would also evolve. In my case, for EFI, we started GIC, more than a decade and a half ago. And so a lot of the early purposes have played out, and now it is more about, how do we create nonlinear value that is not asked for, something that is not asked for but comes out as a bonus. And luckily, we found a strength to build that around, and that was, whereas EFI is built with a lot of M&A acquisitions, and those continue to happen. And so a lot of the other teams, other GICs globally tend to focus on one thing, and just the depth of that one thing. But we are starting to realize that the real value that we bring to our customers is sum of parts of these things, and that became naturally our strength. So why are we? We are here to really exploit the sum of parts to kind of really make our customers' life much, much easier and better. And so who we are, again, master of all, not jack of all, but master of all, and really bringing value by looking at creative, sort of putting components together to solve key business problems.
Okay. Saurabh?
So I guess, the identity question can always be answered in multiple ways, right? Who am I as an individual? Who am I as a representative of my company? And, as a part of what we have in India, collectively, right? So did you say I was like
as
Vishnu?
An organization. Yeah, you were Vishnu.
I was Vishnu. So I obviously help the company make money, our customers make money, save money. So that's Vishnu I heard in the previous session. But in general, I'm from Rocket Software, and one of the big things that we actually think about when we build things like almost everybody else here. But we allow customers to actually maximize the investments that they make in technologies and in IT in general, right, from the products we build. And also, we like simplifying complex things. So, if I simply answer that, those are some of the ways in which we look at ourselves.
Tanuj?
I think who we are is a very interesting context, and as you said, it is all about where you are in your journey. If you are a startup, or if you just entered this industry in this company, in this country, you're probably just figuring your way around everything from what we talked about earlier today, whether it's a low-cost setup to being just a global extension outsourcing. a BPO part of it, as our esteemed speaker earlier talked about. As you transition and get a little bit more mature, you start identifying why you are there and who you really want to be. And that evolution can take decades for some people, and some people will still never get there. At CA Technologies, our mantra is really around building the modern software factory. And just like when you start thinking factory and hardware, you think of places like China. When you start thinking the modern software factory, it is the people in this room and outside in this country that make it happen. That was the genesis of why we were here and why we are evolving ourselves and who we are. But as I think more broadly in the industry, we'll touch upon this in subsequent conversations, but it is about the talent, it's about the jugaad spirit that we have within the organization, it's about the disruption at scale that we can cause, which is what brings us here.
So, Vaithee, I'm going to twist the question. Sure. I think the rest of them are, we all represent a corporate presence of some kind, but you're a free-spirited bird. From your point of view, how do you relate to this question in the context of an entrepreneur as an individual, to the same thing as to what do you consider as the why you are and who you are?
From a startup's point of view, I think it's very different. So typically what happens in organizations and corporates, the who we are gets determined much earlier. In a sense, it's already existing, and we're trying to enter into who we are and participate in a set process. I think in startups, when you're trying to solve a problem, you come with a fascinating idea, you're passionate about doing something, you're trying to build the greatest thing in the world. I think the why we are doing overrides everything else, and there is very little focus on who we are, which is the culture. The second key difference between corporates, organizations, and startups is the who we are is actually a direct reflection of the founders, especially if you have a company where you have one or two founders. I think their personal beliefs, their cultures, their attitudes starts determining the culture of the organization. And people who join in a startup look up to the founders, so they start following the same things. And over time, the founders' personal beliefs becomes the culture of the organization. I'm not necessarily saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what happens. In some cases, we have seen that it results in a great culture. Most cases, it doesn't, because individuals do come with their own biases. So over time, I think it must settle down into what is an organization, who we are. Startups certainly suffer from that because they're so focused in trying to do what they're trying to do and not necessarily create the culture. I mean, it just takes a backseat. It's just driven by individuals.
So it's interesting. So we talked about a few things in terms of the why we are, and to the who we are is sort of, it can take a lot of time. But let me do a quick show of hands. So how many of you represent organizations that have been here in India for greater than 10 years? How many less than 3 years?
Minority.
2, 3.
How many of you are still figuring out what the question was? About that, okay.
I'm tempted to raise my hand.
Right. So I think irrespective of when we came to this country to set up our operation, there was probably a need why we came, and Tanuj, you sort of touched upon that. It was cost, it was a lot of other things. Can you comment about your own journey and maybe something for others to consider as to, is there the Indianness element to what this country brings? Was that even a decision criteria when you came here, or is that becoming one of the criteria as you evolve in that journey?
So I cannot answer that question in the context of my present company, because by the time I joined, we were already 10 years on the ground. But I did play a pioneering role. I was a founding VP for Amdocs when we started in India. So, usually everybody comes for the same reason, but stays for different reasons. And, every company at some point starts looking at how to sort of be more efficient from a cost point of view and process point of view, and that tends to be the beginning. So while that was clearly the reason why Amdocs decided to come to India, that wasn't necessarily the reason that we all took as our be-all, end-all, right? And so we realized that one of the strength, the Indianness strength, is, we grow up, all of us grow up in an extremely resource-constrained environment. And, frugal innovation is really something that is extremely important. A lot of people think like, I can change the world. Only give me a boatload of money and a boatload of time and a boatload of resources, and I can change the world. The idea is how you can do it with resource-constrained manner, et cetera. And in fact, I'll tell you something. A lot of GICs have this problem where people have ideas to innovate something, and then, they don't necessarily are going to get the resources, et cetera. But, in our industry, the capacity that the people have is not fixed capacity. It's an elastic capacity. And that elastic capacity, like oil in the ground, can be tapped through passion, engagement, connecting, what burns inside people to these things. And so, a lot of early start of things, and in fact, one of the things that we started in Amdocs, and we had no business starting it, nobody asked us. In fact, a lot of folks told us to cease and desist, and it ended up being today almost a $1.8 billion business 10 years later, and it was invented in Pune, in Amdocs' GIC. So the key is, I think one of the key that we all have that we can tap in is this, operating in a highly resource-constrained environment, and if we can sort of align all the arrows, I think that can add up to something big.
So Tanuj, I'm going to move to you in terms of, so you did talk about the fact that CA has been here for some time, and now you're sort of pivoting as an organization. So can you talk a little bit about what specially are you and the organization doing about tapping the whole context in terms of who we are as Indians first? Because I think there are certain strengths, like Sam spoke about, that is inherent in us as a nation, as an individual.
Yeah.
So what are some of those elements, particularly, that you are now beginning to leverage or tap?
Okay. Sure, I can take a stab at that, and I'd caution it by saying that we're able to do these in spite of who we are.
Okay.
The in spite of who we are stems from, when you look at, this is appraisal season happening in the country right now, pretty much for most companies. And as soon as you get your appraisal, the next thing you do is go look at LinkedIn, update your profile, and look at where else can you go. I was talking to a gentleman over lunch, and he said, I've just lost 15% of my staff just in the last week alone, and they've all moved en masse to something else. So we do have factors like that at play, and when you look at the population, which is 3 to 5 years in the industry, they don't care about what technology they're working on, what cool thing they're doing, if they're going to transform the world or not. They care about kitna doge, kya doge, kab milega. And so there are simple questions like that. In spite of that, we are able to make a lot of things happen. So if I look at CA specifically, we realized that we're a 40-year-old organization with a lot of cultural heritage, a mindset that is entrenched. We started out with mainframes and then moved on to acquire a whole bunch of companies. When we start thinking about modernizing our workforce, modernizing our platforms, modernizing our identity, it was very obvious that we needed to hire a different set of personas. We needed to make sure that we brought that energy back into the organization. And there was no better place to go do that but India. We now have almost 40% of our worldwide engineering based out of here, running lots and lots of what I would call cutting-edge innovation programs, re-identifying ourselves with new technologies, whether it is the buzzwords around blockchain or even machine learning. But when I look at it, the way we're going about it is it's all in a constrained ecosystem. You're not throwing armies of budgets or talent to be able to train that workforce. I have a program running within the organization which we call the Citizen Data Scientist Program. The whole purpose of that is everybody within the organization ought to get to a level of, say, 100 to 200 in terms of data science skills so that they can apply them in their day job no matter what. Nobody created a budget and an army or anything else to make that happen. It just organically grew with 5 people deciding they wanted to go look at that and scaling it out. And now very soon we have like literally 150 transcending to 1,500 that are going to go take that on. So that's an example in essence of what this country and the Indianness is able to drive with that constrained resource pool. Another area that I can think of is just when we start thinking about our ecosystem more broadly and how we go partner with, say, our SI partners and look at our go-to-market. Traditionally, this company has lived in a very controlled, closed environment, their own dedicated sales force. In the digital economy, that's just not viable. If you're going to go reach out to that small and medium business or the mom and pop shop, you need to expand yourselves. And just how we've seen in India, partnering with the ecosystem, we've been able to embrace that and take it forward. That sort of reminds me of why we are here and what the Indian mindset or the Indianness can actually bring to an organization of this scale.
So I'm going to switch to you, Vaiti. So there was a comment that Faraz made in part of his introduction as well. We have a lot of startups. I think the whole startup ecosystem is vibrant. There are numbers being thrown about, and I think there's quite a bit of activity going on. We also heard in the morning sessions that name the top executive of most organizations seems to be somebody of Indian origin. Yet, we don't seem to have the startups that are able to make it into the global market or the global scale. Vaiti, what are your thoughts about, is it our Indianness now that's sort of becoming an impediment, do you think? Or is there something about it that we need to now work upon in order to be able to get to that global scale? Because our neighbor has been able to do that in about the same time that the opportunity existed for us as a nation. But we don't have many billion-dollar startups that we can talk about. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so there are really two different phases of scale. One part is where startups think up, create a product or a service that solves a problem for hundreds, thousands, 10,000s around them, and that's one phase. The other is to take that product to billions of people across the country, maybe billions across the world. That's a different thing, and the skill sets that are required to do both are totally, completely different. In fact, it's very rare to think of an individual who's able to successfully do both. And I think our Indianness certainly helps. And one of the reasons why there's so much of startup activity happening here is because, and one of the words that I'm going to borrow from him is very important, is the fact that we are able to work frugally and yet innovate. I think it's very important. In fact, the biggest enemy of innovation is capital. I firmly believe that the more capital you throw for innovation, the less chances that you will truly innovate. So I think the ability to innovate using our Indianness is very there. Where I think we're struggling, and perhaps it's a generational problem, but I suspect 15, 20 years later, you will not be asking this question. I think we are not used to global scale coming out of India, right? For us, in fact, 15 years back, our definition of a multinational company was a company that was from outside India, right? I mean, it was very hard for us to associate the word MNC with an Indian company. So in our minds, we had Indian companies and we had MNCs. It's only now that we realize that Indian companies are as good an MNC as anybody else. So I think it's a generational change. We are not able to think of global scale. I suspect the problem will change 10, 15 years later when somebody will show us the path. It's not only easy and possible to create a successful product or a service that works for thousands here, but can work for billions. Right now, I think it's the Indianness that is helping us create the solution. It's also the Indianness, which is our inability to think of that scale successfully, is holding us back. Hopefully that will go away. Clearly, right now, that's a challenge.
Sorry, can I add to that? So I did 3 startups in Silicon Valley, and these were about roughly 15 to 18 years ago. A couple of them were big success. And I noticed in the Valley, the same Indians, I'm an IIT Bombay graduate. We all graduated, moved to US, got our degrees there, ended up staying in Silicon Valley. Many of us started companies in the Valley. And that Indianness did not come in the way of creating enterprise scale, global products or technology companies. So I don't think it's quite the Indianness that is blocking us. in my opinion, there were two things. One of the thing was, if you look at enterprise scale solutions, by revenue, still North America and Europe are the biggest markets. So proximity to the customer matters. You have to make effort when you're geographically far away to kind of reach out and touch those customers, understand their pain points, and not what they articulate, but actually see those in action. So you develop a healthy dose of empathy. Empathy is a core pillar on which you can build solutions. And so that's one aspect that misses when you do the startups here relatively in a vacuum. And the second aspect is, when I came to India 14 years ago and founded Amdocs, what I realized was, at that time, a lot of the tech talent in India was essentially a transient talent. It was, essentially the companies in India put them on planes and sent them abroad for assignments, et cetera. So the leadership here wasn't really as much about business as it was about logistics. So the role models were lacking in terms of what is possible. And it's definitely, when you start aspiring, you need to have role models to know what something is possible. In Valley, one of the reasons why everybody gets up and says, I'm going to change the world, because they've seen quite a few people change the world, and those people don't look or are any different than you. So why not me? So I think those two, now the things are changing slowly. More and more role models are happening. So I do look for, over the next 3 to 5 years, some of those things coming out of Indian market.
So I do want to come to sort of with a question, but before that, I also wanted to, throw open the floor for a few questions from the audience. We'll start from the back, because I heard a bit of a snore. It's all dimly lit there, and
he's such a headmaster.
And we're all people with a lot of baritone voices. I'm sure it's a bit of a lullaby now. So can we pass the mic around to see if there's any questions from the back? And I do want to open with a possibility. I think there was a comment that in the panel, I think Tanuj, you made that, saying that the millennials are really the ones who are going to keep hopping for big salary hikes. It's a pretty controversial statement, in my opinion. Being the only millennial on the panel, I think that way. Would love to hear some thoughts. Here we go.
I want to make a comment on the Indianness and the fact that you said our neighbor is much more progressive in that area. I think the Indianness possibly comes in the policies rather than the people starting up, ventures. I think if you have large corporations with big pockets who can put in a lot of money to keep their ventures going, somewhere the Indianness in the policies takes away that extra advantage of us being Indians. And that's possibly the advantage that the neighbor you spoke about has managed to avoid.
Let's take the point. I think, it's a bit contradictory to what we just heard, because frugality and deep pockets are two different, tones. So what I'm hearing is, deep pockets being able to sustain may be a recipe for success. But then we also heard some of you say, maybe Saurabh, you can take this one up and talk about your thoughts.
Ram, before that, I just wanted to sort of just counter that. So yes, I partially agree with that, but remember, this morning we heard about 996, right? Think of implementing a 996 here, and the reaction that you're going to get from that audience. That 996 has to come from within, right? You have to have the passion and the desire to go change the world. You have to truly, passionately believe in that mission, be it that Chandrayaan mission or whatever you want to call it, or it could be just building that next piece of software. And you have to put your heart and soul into it. I often find us getting bogged down. My current organization, my last 3 organizations, we would get bogged down by numbers. Oh, I need 200 more people to be able to make the next big thing happen. 200 is like a number that just gets thrown out for no reason. I have to often remind people, my erstwhile organization, they started a small DVD rental business which became Netflix. That entire engineering team still is about 200 people, right? And they could change the world and create billions of dollars of market capital around that and value. So it's not about volumes, it's about a passion, pursue a dream, and then be able to really put that hard work, reinvent yourself. They started out thinking it was Blockbuster compete, went to sort of the Walmart compete, went to something else. Today they are taking over the studios of the world, and all with that same talent. So I think there has to be that energy and mindset into it, which is not purely policy driven. It has to come from within, not that chalta hai attitude of I'll do something that's good enough and then get home in time to watch the IPL match. That's what we do.
By the way, 5:30 there's a soccer game for those of you.
Yeah, but what I would add to that is, I mean, so when it comes to Indianness, I mean, there are few things that work for us, right? I mean, as a culture, I mean, the way I look at it is, so for example, I'm in Rocket and we are one of the few companies that are entering India for the first time to do what we want to do. So low cost wasn't the primary issue because we already are in other geographies that are known as low cost. For example, we have a big lab in China, we are in Minsk, Chelyabinsk in Russia, all of which are probably have the similar benefits as India does in terms of cost alone. But I think adaptability, flexibility, in ability to handle complexity, and also be able to put together a pool of high quality talent, breadth as well as depth wise to do such things, has been what has distinguished us. And while it is difficult, like you pointed out, in being so far away from your primary markets and delivering complex products, but actually there are more than one examples of such companies that are doing those. I mean, I have done that in Symantec in the past, where we had complete products being brought out from India. We are attempting to do the same thing actually in Rocket right now, and that is the advantage. But then the chalta hai attitude that you mentioned, and in fact that's a very good point, and I make that as well, that creative solutions are, sometimes we use the word jugaad, right? Everybody talks about it. I mean, there are two, that's a double-edged sword actually. So at one level, I mean, you are creatively finding solutions in a frugal manner, working out problems, but I believe that, I mean, like people say, good is the greatest enemy of the great, right? And sometimes when you are too focused on just finding any solution, you sometimes actually, it gets in the way of actually truly thinking through and coming with something that is really breakthrough and can make you a world-leading company, right? So,
I think they really took you on. Any other questions from?
Yep, one question.
Yeah, there's in the first row here.
We'll just come back. There are two mics.
Yep.
Sir.
So I think the last guy gets the precedence.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Thank you. This is Palani from Society General. So the question is nothing to do with the banking. It's more about the entrepreneurial.
We are unable to.
I can't hear you.
Louder.
Okay. The question is not about. I am Palani from Society General. We are a bank, and the question is not about banking. It's more about the entrepreneurship in the Indian society. So for the past few years, maybe 2 years, we have seen a lot of transformation which is happening, which is impacting the small and the medium businesses. So, for example, the leather industry in the Kanpur is suffering for multiple reasons, political reasons. And similarly, there are a few industries which are actually closing down. And there was a comment about the recent Flipkart acquisition as well. And if you look at the dark side of it, they had to really quit India and become a foreign country because of the policies in India. So you guys have been there and you have seen it all and done it all. So from your perspective, how the Indian political and economical system is really nurturing the entrepreneurs in India? Do we have a long way to go, or do we have enough, the environment is now really warm enough like China or like Brazil or like Africa, maybe Africa is not a good example, that we are really ready to take off, or it will be still a doldrum period for us maybe for next 2 to 3 years?
Perfect. I think, I'll play up two versions of the question if you don't mind. One is in the context of entrepreneurs, and is our environment congenial in terms of policies, politics, and everything else for an entrepreneur to be successful? So we will get that perspective from you, Vaiti. I also want to ask the exact same question, because if you take that into the microcosm of our own organizations, are there forces similar to what a nation's forces are within the organization that are also inhibitors in actually bringing up the Indianness and playing up the actual advantage of who we are as a people? So first we'll hear the startup perspective.
No, so what exactly?
So is there a challenge? Does something need to change here in terms of government, the policies, and the entire ecosystem for entrepreneurs to be a little bit more successful than they are today?
Yeah, so the easy answer is to say yes, because the fact of the matter is, irrespective of which part of the world you are in, policies, regulations can always be improved and made better. But I think one of the challenges for an entrepreneur is to, exactly like you said, I think we succeed despite and not because. So there may be challenges in regulation, there may be challenges in stuff around us, but they can't be holding us back. So, to wait for a perfect regulatory environment for somebody to start up, it's never going to happen. I mean, 50 years later, I think we will be in a situation where some things can be better. I guess 100 years later, I don't have to support my answer at that time, but I think we'll still be in a situation where things can be made better. So while it is tempting to say yes, I don't think it's an issue at all. I think entrepreneurs can and should succeed irrespective of what the conditions are. I'm sure that's what the challenge is. They must be able to find a way out.
So let's play it up in the organizational context, because I think a similar challenge exists as
sorry,
employees
can I-
in an
can I
organization
just
as well.
add to it? I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, one of the blockers that keeps us from achieving, and it doesn't matter whether it's in an organizational context or whether it's in a startup context or even a personal context, is playing the victim card. There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things that could be better. But while some lotuses are still blooming there, why aren't you? So I think, we should stop looking at this. I mean, if we get that, great, awesome. But if we don't get that should not be the reason to kind of stop there and sort of, moan the fact that you can't do anything about it. In fact, it's a misunderstood concept that entrepreneurship is about your core product idea or core technology. Entrepreneurship is about overcoming thousands of challenges every day. And there are all kinds of challenges, from people challenges to, funding challenges to, something that you thought was possible is turning out to be almost impossible. How do you get around? So you find a way around it, and you keep going. And it's like a video game, you have to last. You have to last through all that to get to the end level. It's called the win level. So sorry, I couldn't resist.
I wholeheartedly agree, even in a corporate context. My last role in my previous organization, Microsoft, was part of this team that was sort of a startup within Microsoft called Digital India. We started out as a set of entrepreneurs looking at how can we use the vast ecosystem of Microsoft to solve context-specific problems relevant to India around agriculture, around healthcare, around things like skilling, and so on. And what we realized that there are these usual hurdles that you will come across, organizational hurdles, and so on. But once you started venturing out, you realize that there's always a way. It's just you have to be persistent. You've got to go, and it was amazing to see the state governments coming in and sharing lots and lots of data with us. We were trying to solve a problem around classroom dropouts, looking at Azure and Azure ML and looking at a lot of the machine learning analytics around it to say, can we put some science behind why 50% of the students drop out between K and 12, and how can we fix that problem? It's just once you start with a clear mission and you have the perseverance to go after it, you find very quickly that the ecosystem starts aligning with you and helping you sort of carve that way. But you've got to be resilient, because there was so many naysayers just within the organization for a very long time saying, what are you guys doing? How is it relevant? This is sort of off track, and if you do it here, where else will you apply it? Interestingly, the learning that we had there, we took it to Africa, we took it back to the US, and are able to apply it at scale. And so, again, you've got to have the right attitude, the resiliency, and then a little bit of, I'm just going to go do it no matter what. And that's what made you successful in the Silicon Valley 15 years ago, right? Is that attitude of, yes, there are going to be hurdles, but I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah, but the reality is that at the same time, in everybody's mind, I think the reason these questions come up is, I guess people still feel that we aren't really doing as much as we could have. Have we made as much progress, essentially? I mean, entrepreneurial activity, I would say, has been there for a very long time, and none of it has been ever backed by those in power, right? I mean, even the software services thing happened. I mean, that was also entrepreneurial. That also became big. In fact, that was one of the big successes, right? None of it actually due to government support actively. I mean, so one can easily argue that, that is not why we still are dissatisfied and have that issue, right? I still think, the two big things are, one is, of course, we don't have a big breakthrough innovation which has come out from here, right? So when you see all these entrepreneurial activities, there are times when you wonder whether you're just trying to translate into a Me Too kind of a thing which you're bringing into India, or are you really spending the time and effort to do it the hard way, which is coming up with something completely breakthrough and not just another version of something else.
Got it.
Yeah.
This is Abhilash. I'm sorry, this here.
We'll just come back.
We'll come back to this.
I'll just come back to you in a moment.
So, I mean, one comment. I mean, like Shantanu, thanks for making that comment on Jugaad. I think Jugaad is actually a roadblock to our innovation to a large extent as a country. But I would like the whole panel to kind of talk about what I think is the elephant in the room, which is our education system. Our education system primarily is a system where we are allowed to collect data points, and our performance on the education system is how we can reproduce those data points. Some of us, and to your point that you mentioned that you went from IIT Bombay, you went to Valley, like similar background to me, I think a lot of the learning that I had when I went outside was how do you connect the data points? The connection between data points is infinite, and that's where the storytelling comes in. And I think our education system, still the graduate level, is clearly lacking in that front. So as a mentor to a lot of startups, I completely echo what Shantanu just said. We are not having breakthrough innovation. We are essentially having a square nut developed in the West, being fitted into a round hole in India, and we are not being successful and we are not scaling. That's my point. So comment on education.
I would take a stab at it. First of all, startup is not something that, I have a startup pitch, so I got to do something. And so since I have got to do something, now I got to pick something. And should I pick something profound, or should I pick something mundane? And which one is easier to do and do it? I think it's not such a conscious process. It's kind of like you fall in love with a problem, hopefully, and you kind of start aspiring to solve that problem, and you along the way try to figure out that it's going to be obviously profitable and worthwhile, spending your time and living poor and on the edge for a while. But I do agree about the education thing. And in fact, I'll give you a curious statistics. I mean, this is, I'm not going to quote numbers, but sort of, the toppers in IIT, and clearly I wasn't because I'm talking about them in a third person, the real gold medalists and silver medalists, they all became professors. But a lot of people who did well but not topped ended up starting their companies. Ergo, the lesson is, obviously the people who didn't top in IIT had to sort of cope up with a lot of different sort of activities, etc., and so solve that problem. So I think it's more of a life lesson that you take there rather than the particular subject that you study. In fact, a lot of people have asked me, what did you learn in college? And the answer was never, it was modern physics, or it was high-level math, or whatever. It was how to learn yourself. How to apply system thinking to everything. And this is why, suddenly 3 engineers get into medical field and start healthy on without having any background in that, because, you can go in a systematic way understanding the thing. So, but I do agree, when you look at the Western sort of education style, it's a lot more around creativity in equal measures rather than just rote learning. And I think slowly, I've at least seen some of the universities, etc., where they're trying to consciously bring that in, but it's early.
Yeah, but this is a huge problem. I think the 2 factors that I would say in education, I mean, now that I'm a parent and I also see it more closely as my child grows, is that we still don't give enough importance to original thinking and creative thinking, right? I mean, those are probably completely ignored in all of our initial parts of the education, all the way up to all the entrance exams that people give, right? I mean, none of that is there. I mean, much of the focus is on just learning, formula-based teaching, right? And formula-based learning.
Just a quick time. I saw the 0 pop up. Is it 0? It is 0.
That's the beginning.
Okay. So I think we can go on, and I think it's always a very interesting conversation when we talk about existential crisis. I think just a couple of comments on some of the discussions. I think really, if you look at the transition from why we are to who we are, is really a journey. And I think for many of us as organizations that have set up and are not from the free-spirited world that Vaiti is, but from corporate, I think there is always the first step is to basically copy and make sure that you establish the existing culture. And that's what a lot of us drive. To then being able to do a good job with that and move on to something where you're carving out your identity. So it's not this or that. And just to comment about the educational system, I don't think there's anything wrong with the kids. I think it's wrong with the parents that are stuck with the old way of learning. Because I think the kids want to explore, the parents are still steeped. And I want to leave you with a thought saying, in fact, is one of the inhibitors of actually getting out the X factor in people with Generation X. Because to me, I think that's a generation that also needs to transition in its mindset and be a little bit more open to risk-taking and encouraging a completely new wave of thought. So with that, thank you so much for staying awake.